today. Welcome everyone. We're excited to have Dr. Amanda Wetegrove-Romine from PsychHike with us today. We are recording today's session, so we ask if everyone could turn off their cameras and mute themselves during the presentation. We will be monitoring the chat, so you can share any questions you have in the chat, and I'll be monitoring it and sharing with our speaker. So I will be sharing this recording tomorrow via email. So if you're uncomfortable with your name showing, you can go ahead and you can private message me, and I'll make sure that I've got you down for attendance. And then I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. TCINN is headquartered in Austin, and as such, I'm on the ancestral and unceded land of the Katankawa, Comanche, and Sana people. Our ongoing colonial presence on Indigenous lands compels us to take action now to counteract the effects of colonization. The work we do through the Texas Children in Nature Network is one small step towards that effort. And I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat about land acknowledgements in just a moment. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amanda and get us started. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the mental health benefits of getting outdoors. And I'm sure if you're here, it's because you already know how good it feels to get outside. But I'm really going to talk about some of the psychological research that's been made available to us. And so before we get started, just a little bit about me. I'm a licensed Texas psychologist out of San Antonio, but I have a really unique twist on the work I do because I get women out of the traditional kind of four walls of the office and onto the trail. And I found from my own personal experience working on my mental health that getting outdoors was such an important component in my own healing that I wanted to get other women outdoors as well. So I also educate the public on the benefits nature has on our mental health. And I work with folks who are experiencing depression and anxiety, especially caused by perfectionism. I work with people who have experienced trauma. And I also work with people who have trouble falling and staying asleep, and people who have binge and overeating coping styles. My job as a therapist and a clinician is really to kind of synthesize the research that's put out by scientists and make it palatable for my clients. So sometimes research can be really confusing and jargony. And what my job is to take that and explain to folks how they can use it in their day-to-day life to help them cope with the stress that we all feel. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk with you about that. Just an outline for what we're going to be doing today. We're going to talk about mental health and emotional issues that lots of people struggle with and kind of normalize that side of it. We're going to then talk about how nature can help us with those difficulties and how we can use that as a tool to improve our mental health, in addition to, all of the other things that we're doing. And then we'll practice mindfulness. I'll actually have you all take a few minutes away from your computer and access whatever outdoor or green space that you have available to you. And I'll give you some instructions for that. And then we'll wrap up with question and answer. And I believe that Sarah will be monitoring the chat. And so you can, put questions in as they come available or as you think of them. And then we'll kind of come back to them at the end of this. A quick disclaimer, I am a psychologist. However, this presentation today is only meant for educational purposes and it's not diagnostic. It doesn't constitute a doctor-patient relationship between us or replace any mental health treatment with a professional. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to offer some resources to you if you do feel like you need to seek out services. But what I like to tell people when I'm talking to them about using nature as a tool is that this is in no way meant to replace anything that you're already doing for your mental health, right? So if you're taking medications, if you're in therapy or some kind of treatment, keep doing that. Getting outdoors is simply another tool that we can add to our toolbox when we're looking for ways to cope with our emotional health problems. Okay, so let me just talk about some of the problems that I see in my practice, right? I kind of talked about the types of problems that people come in with. Like I said before, trouble falling and staying asleep. I'm going to give you some stats on the next slide about how many people struggle with that. Difficulty concentrating and focusing at work and school. Feeling sad most of the time. You know, there's nothing abnormal or wrong with getting sad some of the time, especially with all the things happening in the world around us. But it can become a problem and become pretty debilitating when we feel sad most of the time, or we feel anxious most of the time because we're worrying. I work with folks who get easily irritated, or they start having angry outbursts and they have trouble getting along with the people they live with or they work with. And then a lot of people come in and they tell me that they're noticing that, you know, as stress goes up, they're looking for ways to cope, and they start to over rely on some unhealthy coping tools like overeating or overspending or drinking. And so I just want you to take a few moments and note to yourself, you know, which ones of these have you been experiencing lately? Not because we're diagnosing anything today, but because I just want you to kind of have a sense going into this as to how nature can really help you, because I promise you there's a nature prescription for almost every problem that I see as a mental health therapist. And so we're going to talk about each one of these and then what the research has shown us about getting outdoors to help with these issues. So what's been really interesting about the last 2 years, and I'm sure that y'all have all noticed this, is there's been like a huge interest in the outdoors, right? I know for me, I've lived in the same neighborhood for over 10 years. And when the pandemic started, there were people that I was seeing outdoors in my neighborhood walking that I had never seen before. And I think that most of us really, you know, if we didn't already know that nature and the outdoors could be really healing and helpful and beneficial, we learned that during the pandemic, right? We found out that getting outdoors could help us fight that cabin fever of, you know, being asked to stay indoors and socially distance. It kept us close to home, but gave us an outlet that we could, you know, still be physically distanced from people. And then when things started to shut down, like gyms and studios, it gave us a place to exercise and move our body. And I think for many of us, right, in those, especially in those really early days, it really provided some routine and structure to get outdoors, you know, for that evening walk or morning walk. So I'm just curious, and you can, you know, put this in the chat, how many of you noticed that, you know, when the pandemic started, that you started to get outdoors more? And you can just kind of, yeah, so I see Lauren raising her hand. Yeah, so a lot of us really took advantage of that. So about a year into the pandemic, which, you know, was back around March, the American Psychological Association put out a Stress in America report. And what they found is that 31% of us reported that our mental health had worsened. The rates were even higher for moms who had kiddos at home and were doing virtual learning. Over 60% of us reported undesirable weight changes. Millennials had the highest average weight gain. And this is, you know, I think really profound when we talk about sleep, right? Is that over 60% of us also reported that our sleep had changed. People of color were affected the most in that area. And back in March, you know, I don't know what the numbers would look like now, but back in March, you know, about half of us were really feeling anxious about the idea of adjusting back to in-person interactions. You know, thinking about the pandemic being over and things going back to normal, people still had a lot of anxiety about that. And so, you know, back to that page where I listed, you know, all of those problems that people come to therapy with, if you check the box on some of those, you're not alone, right? And this report tells us that people really started to struggle. I see Melody's point about dads of virtual learners. Yeah, interestingly enough, the research showed that it was for moms. It would be really interesting though to look at how dads were coping. Okay. Another thing to note is that urbanization has been linked to higher rates of anxiety, depression, stress-related illnesses, sedentary lifestyles, and even taking more time off of work due to illness. So you couple the high stress of the last couple of years, this living during a pandemic, with living in an urban area, and we really are at high risk of having poor emotional and mental health. Right, so this is my city. For those of y'all who are checking in from San Antonio, I'm sure you recognize the skyline, right? It's a beautiful city and it's highly urbanized. It's really hard to find green spaces, although, our community leaders are really working, on that kind of planning, which I appreciate. The unfortunate thing is we really can't escape urbanization because the estimates are predicting that by 2050, 2/3 of the world's population will be urbanized, right? So we really have to start thinking and getting really strategic about how we access green spaces and how we make green spaces accessible to all people, but also how we use that to cope with some of the consequences of living in a highly urbanized world and also living in, a time of unprecedented stress because of, all of the things that are going on in our world. Okay, so the good news, right? I gave you some bad news up front with all the statistics about, mental health problems and urbanization, but the good news is even short bursts in nature can have huge benefits on our mental health, right? We don't have to spend a lot of time outdoors is what the research is telling us to reap the rewards. I know that probably many of you don't have time to get to the gym or go to therapy or do all the other things that help us cope with stress, right? We're all doing the best that we can with the time that we have. But the good news is, nature is free and we can access it in a lot of places. Just to highlight how much time we are spending away from nature, estimates show that at this point, most of us are spending about 10 hours a day on screens, right? So whether that's our computers or tablets or phones or TVs. So a lot of time on screens and 90% of our time indoors. I would imagine this group of folks is a little different because I know that if you're here as part of Texas Children in Nature, you really probably value the outdoors. So your numbers might look a little different, but for most Americans, this is the reality. We also spend most of our time multitasking, which really fatigues our brain. And we're going to talk about that. Multitasking and that fatigue on the brain makes us less productive and creative, which affects our work and our school. It makes us worse at problem solving and critical thinking and paying attention. And so disconnecting in nature really is just so restorative for the brain. And that's why I get so excited when I talk to people about this, about how easy it is to do some of these things that I'm going to talk about, getting outside. So let's talk about sleep, right? Over 60% of people struggling with sleep these days. So it's a big problem for many of us. Our sleep drive is regulated by light and the sun. And so, right, if we're spending 90% of time indoors, not getting regular access, that's really gonna disrupt our circadian rhythm, get it out of whack. And so what research has shown is that getting exposure early in the morning by taking a mid-morning walk, even at just about 20 minutes, can really reset our circadian rhythm for the day. It affects our melatonin production, which is, that sleep hormone, and really gets us back on track for the day. And so if, when you were looking at that list, you checked off sleep problems, trying to get outdoors early is going to be a tool that's going to be really useful for you. There was a really interesting study where they took a group of people just out on a weekend camping, I think it was 3 days without electronics. And you're going to hear me say that a lot. When you get outdoors, get outside without electronics. And that also helped them improve their sleep, helped them fall asleep earlier, sleep better. It really reset their circadian rhythm. Now, we can't all get out and go camping. The 20 minutes is more doable for most of us. And so I just want you to take a note of that, and kind of, again, put that in your toolbox if that's something you struggle with. Now let's talk about concentration, attention, focus, all the things that help us in our work, and for those of us who go to school, in our schoolwork. So research consistently shows that attention, concentration, and focus are restored after spending time in a green space. And I forgot to mention this, but at the end of this presentation, I'll offer some resources so that if you'd like to go and look at those articles and that information, you can do that. So the research around this, though, is really interesting because they looked at lots of different times. And so, for example, participants performed better at creative problem-solving tasks when they had prolonged exposure to nature. So several days. There was a study that took people out into the wilderness for 4 days, and those participants were then asked to do some problem-solving and creativity tasks, and they improved by a full 50%. Most of us, again, can't get out in the woods for 4 days, although I know that we would love to do that. And so what can we do just in the short term? There is some research that shows that even shorter bursts of exposure can be micro-restorative for the brain, right? So the effects may not be as long lasting and they might not be as profound, but we will experience benefits. So people that just get up from their computer and go sit outside, for a break, they find that they are able to come back and be more productive in their job, focus more, concentrate more. It's not going to last as long, right? But you can get that little micro restorative benefit pretty quickly. There's been studies where they looked at students and had them walk through a green space every day just on their regular, way to school. And those kiddos performed better on standardized tests than the group of kids who walked through a more like concrete urban setting. And so that's something that, that they're just doing on their regular way to school. Didn't really take any extra time or effort. And so that's really, the point that I want to drive home today is that while some research does show that, getting out for days is helpful, there's lots of ways that we can incorporate just little bursts of outdoor exposure to get some short-term benefits that can help us. And I'm looking at Rink's comments, sometimes just taking that short walk to the mailbox, right, is all that we need. Although for those of us who love the outdoors, we would love to get away for, 3 or 4 days or longer. Let's keep talking about concentration and focus and memory and kind of how our brain works, right? So bird songs and other calming nature sounds decrease cortisol. That's that stress hormone, right? That's probably firing for all of us all the time. And it helps increase our attention. Bird songs specifically have been shown to relax us physically, so kind of get the tenseness out of us, while also stimulating us mentally, which means helping us be able to focus and concentrate without being all, tense. The super interesting thing about this is that our brain doesn't seem to know the difference of whether it's real birds chirping or a recording. And so for those of us, who access is an issue for, right? We can't get out quickly and get around birds, right? Having recordings seems to be just as helpful. Our working memory can also improve with regular access to a nature view or even just a 50-minute nature walk. So the research around this that I found was that They looked at college students and they set some of them up with a really beautiful, view of a green space, and they set the other students up just looking at kind of like a brick wall. And so working memory really improved for the group of students who were able to look at a green space. And so when you're thinking about, your home office or your home, if you can, thinking about how to set that up so that you have some access to a green space, if you can do that. One 90-minute walk in nature also improves people's cognitive processes, right? The way their brain works. They were able to pay attention and concentrate better and do more problem solving. So the really interesting thing here is that this is one 90-minute walk, one 50-minute walk, right? And so that for a lot of us is much more doable, again, than getting out for days and days and days. So can you, after work, stop at a trail and get, an hour, 45 minute to an hour walk in maybe, or an hour and a half walk in. I just want you to start thinking about how you might be able to incorporate some of this into your day-to-day life. Now let's talk about mood, right? Which is the way we feel. Again, that 90-minute walk in nature can really decrease rumination, which is our brain's tendency to sit and stew on things without it being, very productive. So it's different than problem solving. It's just sort of sitting and stewing on the problem and kind of thinking about it and replaying it to where it's not really useful or helpful. And how many of us have experienced that? And the 90-minute walk in nature can also decrease our worry, right? So when we're talking about anxiety, that's where this one is kind of getting at. What happened on that 90-minute walk? They found that it decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex. That's that kind of front part of our brain that does all of the worrying and planning and rehearsing and all of that. And so it kind of quieted that part of our brain down, which is really cool. A 50-minute walk, right? That research about 50-minute walks also decreased people's anxiety and improved their mood. And so again, this is something maybe you can get away doing with on your lunch break or after school or work. But overall, if you can't do 50 or 90 minutes, what the research is showing is that just the more time we spend in nature, the less ruminations we seem to have. And ruminations are very closely tied to depression and anxiety. So if those are things that you're struggling with, again, I'm not suggesting that this is a cure-all and it's the only thing you do, but how could you add this into the mental health treatment that you're already getting? Another study looked at 120 minutes spread over a week. And I think for a lot of us, this is much more palatable if you're thinking about, okay, 2 hours over the course of a week, how can I do that? Can I get 6 quick 20-minute walks in at a park, or even just, go sit on a bench during my lunch break and have lunch outside? So 120 minutes spread over a week really seemed to increase people's mood and their life satisfaction. On the other hand, families who got outdoors together, right? Because up until this point, we've just been talking about the research on individuals getting outdoors, but research showed that families that got outdoors together showed more cohesiveness, unity, they got along better, they worked to, they had them work on tasks and projects together, and the families that got outside together worked together better after spending time outdoors. So whenever I'm working with moms and dads in therapy who are, just really struggling with getting their kiddos to do chores and work together as a family, I really encourage them, like, why don't you get outside first, spend some time outdoors before doing the errands and the household chores, and see if that works for you. And oftentimes they come back and they're like, yeah, it really does seem to help getting outside. And then coming inside and kind of focusing our attention, right? Because again, that research on green spaces does show that we have better focus and attention when we are exposed to a green space of some sort. I'm looking at Jasmine's question about, can a 50 or a 90-minute run work in the same way as a walk? Yeah, it's not even about the movement as much as the exposure to the green space. So for some of these studies, folks aren't even moving their bodies. They're sitting on a bench or something like that. The main point is immersion in green space without any distraction to the brain, or with just little limited distraction to the brain, right? So when someone is saying they run outdoors, I encourage them as best they can, try to do that without headphones on, without music, without a podcast. I know we love to multitask, and I'm, guilty of that, where I want to try to get my favorite book in while I'm on that run. But really, in order to get the benefits of green spaces, we really want to be fully immersed in the nature experience. And so we're going to talk about that and actually practice it in a little bit. Oh, and here we are, time to practice. So I know that we're all in different areas, different settings. We all don't have the same access to green spaces right now. Some of us are at home, some of us are at work. And so I really wanted this activity to be as accessible as possible to everyone. If you are in a place where you can get up from your chair and go outdoors for a few minutes, I encourage you to do that. We're going to take about 8 to 10 minutes doing this. So it's 2:25. I'd ask you to come back at about 2:35. So we still have time for question and answer. So if you can get outdoors, get outdoors. If you can't, that's okay. But if you have a window where you can sit and kind of look out at a green space, that's great. And if you can't do that, I even have a YouTube video that I really like and I share a lot. And so I'm going to put that in the chat, and then you can watch that on your own. It's about a 3 or 4 minute video of some like nature scenes. Before we do that though, what exactly are you doing, right? What does it mean to use nature as a prescription for our emotional health? Like I was suggesting earlier, the main takeaway from the research is that it really needs to be a mindful experience, right? So we're not going to get the same benefits just walking through nature, but like if we're looking down at our phone texting, or if we have music in our ears, similar to what Kevin is saying in the chat, trail running is much more enjoyable than on a track or treadmill, because it is outdoors and you're getting this like really immersive experience. And so for many of us, myself included, that's really difficult, right? We have the urge to like, let me just check my phone for a minute and make sure there's no text or there's no emails that came in, or, oh, I heard that little ding, let me, make sure that it's nothing important. What I really, really want you to do though, even if it's just for a few minutes, is really try to go and immerse yourself with your senses, our 5 senses, right? So no phones, no electronics. So if you're outdoors, what does it feel like to sit in nature? What is the temperature like? What does it feel like on your skin, the sun or the wind? What do you hear? What do you see? Even like, what does the air taste like? If you're sitting at your window, you may not be able to feel it in the same way, but you can feel some sunlight coming through the window. You can definitely see, and you may even be able to hear if you get quiet enough. And same thing with the video. So, yep, it needs to be a mindful experience. Exactly, Brittany. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the YouTube link in the chat for those of y'all who, need to access nature today in that way. And again, I just want to strongly iterate that there's lots of research that shows that simply looking at a picture of nature or listening to a recording of nature can have short-term benefits. So nothing wrong with doing the YouTube thing. But if you are able to get outside, let's go ahead and do that, and then come back at around again, 2:35, 2:36. I'm gonna give everyone just a minute more to get back. I'm realizing it's hard to know who is back and who's not when the cameras are off like this. This is a new experience for me, but I'm hoping everyone gets back soon. Okay, thanks, Cynthia. Thank y'all for letting me know. It's hard to tell. I'm just curious, what was that like for y'all? Anything that you noticed? Any thoughts that you had? Any sensations? Anything you'd be willing to share about what you saw or heard? And I think it would be okay to unmute your mics for this part. Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong about that.
That's great. You can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, if you'd like to unmute and share that or use the chat, but I just think it'd be interesting. We have people from, it seems like all over the state to kind of see what people's experiences are like in different parts of Texas. Okay, so Brittany, noticing the sound of birds even more than usual. It's interesting when we think about the times that we get outdoors, right? So if you're like me, I have kind of a traditional 8 to 5. And so a lot of the times I'm getting outdoors in the evening. And so I would imagine, yeah, like getting out in the middle of the day is going to feel and sound differently than doing it in the evening or even earlier in the morning. Oh, Shannon is sharing that a bug landed on her head. I hope you're okay, Shannon. Yeah. Anybody else want to share about their experience before we kind of move on and wrap up? Or open it up, I guess, for Q&A. Oh yeah, and Susie, I saw that you have the award for the distance award, I think, out in the UK, and so it's damper there. It's at least in San Antonio, not damp. It's a pretty nice day here. I see people talking about their dogs, hearing a woodpecker, butterflies, yeah. All my favorite stuff to see and hear. Thank you all so much for doing that with me. Okay, so y'all keep adding that in the comments so y'all can keep up with what everyone is seeing. I just want to wrap up. I have a couple of slides just on some more really easy strategies for incorporating more nature into our day. So I'm a big believer that small change leads to big change, and also that small use of tools like can be enough, right? So I think, and I always say I'm a recovering perfectionist, right? So I have this tendency, if I'm not careful, to want to do everything at like 110%, right? So if I'm going to get out in nature, I'm going to go for like a 2-hour hike, or I'm going to go camping in the woods for 3 days. And while those things are really nice, they're not, for most of us anyways, who, are tied to jobs and families, they're not sustainable, or they're not, regularly accessible. And so I'm like a very big believer in just trying to find really small ways to bring the outdoors and nature into our lives in ways that are sustainable and that we can do regularly, right? We may not get as big of a benefit, but we will get, more regular doses, so more regular benefits. And so thinking about, in your home, right? How do you create a green space in your home? Looking at a picture of nature, right? So having some pictures or some YouTube videos kind of ready to go, right? That you can grab really quickly after a stressful event, bring that cortisol down that we were talking about and recover more quickly. Listening to nature sounds to get kind of into a relaxed state before class or before a stressful work situation or a study session or something like this, a presentation, before something like this, I always make sure that I get a little bit of nature, because I tend to get kind of nervous about these things, right? The cortisol gets pumping and nature really helps me relax. taking a nature break to improve productivity. So we're a culture of hustle and burnout, right? We kind of wait until our stress is like at a 15 and then we say, oh, maybe I need to get up from my computer and go outside, or maybe I need to kind of move my body, right? What I always encourage people is like, let's try to be more proactive and kind of get up, stretch the legs, get a nature break before we get so stressed out that it's going to be harder to recover and bring cortisol levels down, right? So let's do it as a more proactive and less reactive. Also, you know, talking about families, right? Building cohesion and unity by getting your family out together regularly, right? So kind of making that a regular occurrence for your families. And before I move on, I'm gonna just share a link. I've compiled all of these 10 strategies into a PDF. So if you prefer to have it that way, you can get that at this link that I've shared. If not, you can also take notes of these. But I just wanted to share that. You know, spending 20 minutes outside to decrease stress, leaving your phone and other distractions, and just really immersing yourself in nature completely. Working on those negative thought loops that we get into, that rumination, by focusing on the sights and the sounds and the smells of nature. So really shifting the attention and the focus of your brain away from rumination and onto the present moment. That's mindfulness. If you're having trouble sleeping, getting 20 minutes of really, you know, mid-morning, early light exposure, getting out early. And then something that I try to do, you know, that's really simple. You may not think that it's going to do anything in the big scheme of things, but it will, is parking near trees and shrubs so that you increase your green space exposure even when you're just out on errands and kind of running around town. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Just, you know, at the beginning, I said that I would provide some mental health resources, and I want to do that. There's a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline if you need that, and there's also virtual chat, right? So these are crisis level services. If you're, you know, simply looking for some outpatient support, you know, you want to get connected with a therapist, there's all sorts of ways to do that. Psychology Today has a list of therapists, but I really like to use inclusivetherapist.com because you can put all your information in and really find someone who is just allied and aligned with you know, the things that are important to you and how you identify. And then I also just included my contact information here at the bottom, Instagram account, email, and website in case you have any questions. Sarah will be sending these resources out, but if you want to connect with me directly because you have any specific questions about anything that we talked about today, I would love to chat with you about that. I could talk about this stuff all day. And then here's the list of resources. Again, I can offer these to Sarah and have her send them out. And with that, I'll stop sharing and turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Amanda. We don't have any questions in the chat yet. You've been doing a great job of addressing them as they've come up, but I just wanted to let everyone know if you have some questions, you can either take yourself off mute and just go ahead and ask them, or if you want to put them in the chat, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Jaime, if you want to go ahead and you take, yep. I'm assuming you have a question. You took yourself off mute. Yeah,
sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much for a great presentation. I would love if there is, I know that Sarah's going to send out resources and you provided a lot of links. If there's any kind of links to any kind of research ongoing that you have, any good papers. I really like the bird sounds and the calming aspect of that. I'm working on some biodiversity and health talks coming up. So if there's anything that you can provide like that, that'd be awesome. Any links?
Yeah, some of them are in the references, but if you want to, if maybe we can connect offline, I can get those to you. there's so much research out there, which is really cool. And so I would need to go through that and kind of find that specific article, but I will do that for you for sure.
Okay, we've got a question here from Brianna. She says, thanks for the presentation. I found what you shared insightful, and it resonates a lot with me and the work I've been doing with kids in Austin this year. A general sense I'm getting is immersion in nature or green space is a pause or a treat or a coping mechanism or a break from work or school or screens. Do you think it is possible for a larger shift where more of our time in modern urban cities can be spent in nature and the shorter bursts are when we tune into screens and emails? This might be a larger existential question for the modern urban lifestyle.
Yeah, and I always think, you know, as a psychologist, I see mostly adults, young women, 17 and up, but I always think like educators, you know, K through 12 educators, that's such hard work, right? Trying to get these kids outdoors when we know it's good for them. I think, you know, kind of my stance is like in our urban settings, we have to really advocate for city planning and green space access, right? And that's up to us, you know, the people that vote, you know, our leaders in to really ask that of us. I know just locally in San Antonio, our mayor, you know, we have the mayor's fitness council, and part of that is he's really looking at mental health and how green spaces and the outdoors can help. But I think that, yeah, it's gonna have to, you know, happen kind of on a community level for sure. I'm going back to that question just to make sure I didn't miss anything. And I think also like with the to your point of kind of spending less time on screens and emails, right? We have to show some restraint, and it's so hard because we get such a dopamine hit from our devices. And so that's really hard to make that shift. But I think the more awareness that we have of what the devices do to us, right? Like the more information we have, I think then the more that we can have conversations and maybe to make changes in our families and our communities. I hope I answered that question.
Gloria has her hand up. So Gloria, if you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if you've covered this. I came a bit late, but I was wondering about evaluation tools out there for those of us who are bringing programming to communities and families, patient families, and offering this types of nature immersion experiences. How can we evaluate those effects and benefits after the experience before any surveys out there that you can help me with?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like psychological tools that we use, screeners and assessments. It really depends on what you're trying to evaluate. So are you evaluating like mood or attention? And in all of the studies, right, when they're looking at something specific, they're evaluating that in some way with some type of tool, typically like a questionnaire or a screener. And so it would just really depend on what you were trying to evaluate, and then like the battery that you would put together. So again, with these references, you know, you can look at what they evaluated with. I will say that the reference page that I put up is not like exhaustive at all. I just sort of hit, you know, the highlights. But there's a lot of research out there that, you know, isn't on this reference page that I can point you to. If you're looking for something specific, like if you're looking to evaluate something specific like mood or attention and focus or life satisfaction, right? There's probably a different tool for each of those.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's kind of hard to say, but because we just started and we know that there are effects, positive effects of this experience out there. And I guess we just want to go for the low hanging fruit and just figure out what would be the easiest way to evaluate those benefits, and whatever is easier to evaluate through some sort of questionnaire or a survey. And these are families from lower income, communities. So we're just starting out.
Yeah, kind of thinking about what are the areas you're evaluating, and then if you want to reach out to me offline, I would be happy to help kind of support you in finding the appropriate like measurements. In therapy, obviously I use things like depression screeners and anxiety screeners and PTSD symptom screeners, right, depending on what I'm working with someone about. But one of the other things I do is I ask people, like, keep a log, like on the days that you go outdoors, just kind of jot down or put it in your phone, like how much time did you spend outdoors? And then on a 0 to 10 scale, like what does your mood feel like afterwards, right? So even kind of it's not as scientific, of course, but it gives someone some data to kind of see for themselves, like, wow, when I spend 45 minutes outside, like I feel very different than when I just get 10 minutes outside or something like that, right? And then as we have kind of that data for ourselves, it motivates us to then want to make that a priority in our life.
Thank you.
Oh, and I see Roxanne put something in the comments that might be helpful to you, Gloria, a family assessment device.
Yes, I see it. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great.
We also have a question from Sherry, if you wouldn't mind putting the resource slide back up again.
Yeah, let me.
And I'll also share all those resources tomorrow in the follow-up email.
Okay, I think y'all can see that, right?
Yes.
And what I will say, Dr. Bratman out of Stanford has like a ton of research in this area. These were just a couple of the articles. So I would encourage you to look at Stanford. I want to say they call it their nature lab or something like that, right? But sometimes these schools are doing a lot of research. The research about the camping trip that was out of the University of Colorado, so they're doing a lot of research, a lot of nature research. And then I know that REI has recently partnered with a university to start pumping out research on the benefits of the outdoors. So I'm really excited to see what they do. But sometimes if you look at the colleges or the universities that are doing the research, you'll find even more research articles that could help you with whatever it is that you're kind of trying to look at.
Wonderful. We probably have time for one more question. If anyone has another question. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and Jamie put in the chat, the Children in Nature Network has a library of resources as well. That's a great resource library that is free for any of you to use. They have lots of academic journal articles linked there. And I'll be sure to share that in the email tomorrow as well. So Suze, or Susie, I'm not sure which, I'm sorry, has a question. She says, I'm researching social inclusion effects through nature. So the family cohesion thing was interesting. Can you give a brief explanation of why?
Can you repeat that one more time? I lost my mute and I got a little distracted.
Yeah. I'm researching social inclusion effects through nature. So the family cohesion thing was interesting. Can you give a brief explanation of why?
Of why the families that spent time outdoors seem to be more cohesive? I mean, that's a really interesting thing about this research on nature, is that no one is really quite sure what it is about nature that gives these effects. There's all sorts of theories about it, about what it does to the brain, but there's not one, you know, consensus on why. That particular study, I think if I'm remembering it correctly, they looked at families that walked through like a green space together, and then other families, I want to say they walked through like a mall or some kind of busy, noisy, you know, area together. You know, my theory personally is that like our brain is so fatigued all the time by the culture that we're living in, that part of it is just the restoration to the brain, you know, based on just getting a break from all of that stimulation. I would imagine if there was a scientist here doing the research, they could explain that in a much more elaborate way. But yeah, that's a really great question.
The response was hoping to find out some mechanisms. Thank you. I'll look for that research. So thank you so much, Dr. Wetegrove-Romine. This has been a fantastic presentation. Just a reminder for everyone, I put a link to our evaluation in the chat, so if you wouldn't mind filling that out, it'll take you less than 5 minutes, I promise. And then also a reminder that our registration for the summit is open. So go ahead and register today. Early bird for our registration ends on October 15th. So we are reaching that. And other than that, thank you so much, everyone. It has been a pleasure, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.